are incapable, that they are the ones who need actual help, Mr. Speaker. While it is very hard to change religious belief with that one policy. So at the end of the day, the majority of the people's perception will remain the same, while the very minority will be affected by the policy. So the majority will stigmatize these specific group of people, women, so-called women, Mr. Speaker. So at the end of the day, we think this will only weaken the very position of these women identified by the opening government. And this will only socially stigmatize the position of women and weaken their power within religious institutions at the end of the day, which is a clear harm for these women, which only worsens the problem that they have identified. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, we think this policy itself, within this policy itself, government is unfairly intervening into various religions, right? Because according to their policy, they're setting its policies to every kind of religion, Mr. Speaker. And at the end of the day, there will be some religions that will be affected, but some religions that will not be affected by this policy, because obviously some religions do not really go directly against the value that the government is promoting, Mr. Speaker. So at the end of the day, we think government is unfairly and not equally intervening into diverse religious problems, Mr. Speaker. Because just because one religion's fundamental value is different from the government's fundamental value, the government is not equally, not fairly infringing upon that specific religion, while it's not caring about the other religions who do not go against the government's value, Mr. Speaker. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, we think this policy itself will be a ground for more further government intervention and justification in the future, Mr. Speaker. Because at the end of the day, we think because once we allow this policy, it sends a message to the government, okay, when you see within the religious fundamental value, you think one certain value is different from your own value, you are free to intervene into that matter and try to fix it with your own policy at the end of the day. So we think this policy itself will become a justification for the government to directly intervene and change whatever the value that the religious institutions are holding. So at the end of the day, we on the opening opposition stands for the freedom of religion of these individuals and the sovereignty rights of the religious institutions. So we're very proud of them.
Right, thanks Speaker for her speech, and now invite the first speaker from the closing government team, the member of Parliament.
This question from the open government is that whether the government can interfere the religious idea of certain religion. We believe yes, because we believe the government exists in order to protect the fundamental right of every people. Right? We think that in the first place, the right to believe the certain religion is a fundamental right of every people. Because we think the religion can build your life. Right? We think that through the process of believing your religion, we think your life is constructed. We believe your life is also depending on the religion. We believe concerning this fact that religion can influence all your life. We believe the religion is the fundamental right of the people. At the same time, we believe that the deep people can have the characteristic which cannot change by themselves, as open government very told you. We believe in that case, if the government intervene and saving the fundamental right of the people, we believe this is the only way that we can change the situation of the South Pole. We believe, therefore, we are proud to propose this motion. Okay, firstly, let me review for the previous year, and after that, I try to introduce our extension. We have two extensions in today's debate. First, I try to talk about why, under such a problem is so severe, so why we think that religious groups itself have no ability, no capacity to change the religion by themselves, and why we believe the government intervention uniquely changes the situation while we can protect the fundamental right of the people. Second, I'd like to talk about today's opening government side have really talked about the changing within the religious groups. So I try to explain more about the society level, why we think that the more equal opportunity can be protected within the more overall product view. Okay, part 3. Let me from the previous speakers. Okay, what today's government side told you is simply we think the government cannot decide what kind of ideas is true, what kind of interpretation is the better of the Bible. We believe rather the government is the only actor that we can change the interpretation of the Bible. Because we believe, I told you in my first extension, but we think that the religious group itself has no capacity to change by themselves as per the interpretation of the group. Moreover, we believe that in order to protect the fundamental right, we believe the government have a clear justification to intervene. Of course, open government side have clearly talked about how the idea of affirmative action in order to protect the equal right of the people, it is not rebutted from opening opposition side. Okay, moreover, he talked about somehow the majority of the idea remains same even under the model. Okay, today's opening of government side has really talked about that how us surrounding people can see the idea, can see the active action of the gay people, how they can change the perception. Please engage. More we think that these people can actually change. I told in my extension rather than increasing my verification. Right? Okay, let's move on to extension. I think the verification is also good. Okay, first, I tried to talk about how under status quo, the religious groups have no capacity to change their interpretation of the Bible by themselves. Mr. Speaker, the thing that who changed the idea, who changed the interpretation of the Bible, or who changed the idea of religion is basically reader. That is a concept, that is consensus in this round, right? We think for the reader, well, how the reader making the decision is of course according to the idea of the believer, that is a supporter of the religious group. Because we think the reader have to listen for the people. We think in this case, what we can say is that under status quo, these members, these believers of that group have no idea that they have to change the idea of certain religion. Because as open government has clearly talked about, this clear historical norm, right? We think that through 300 years or 300 years, there's some idea that gay is wrong in that religion. We think through this process, what happens, I try to explain more clearly, that we think lastly, the believer of the religion is completely affected by that historical norm, right? There is certain dogmas in the religion, and these people within that religion, and they listen to that, they reading certain Bibles, and they learn that this kind of interpretation is completely right. There is no us. For these people, they already think that as for the members, there is no reason why that they themselves changing the idea. That is the situation of the status quo. We believe, therefore, as for these people, there is no motivation that by themselves changing the religion. We believe that the situation of the status quo, basically these believers are stick to the past education. We believe they cannot change. We think that the situation, we believe that completely problematic. Okay.
If you agree that the situation cannot change because of that history, how is one single policy going to change the social perception?
Okay, what we are saying is that because of the historical reason, they themselves cannot change the religion. But we think the government intervention, government interfering of that religious group can change that. I explain. Of course, we think because of that, these reasons under status quo, there is no motivation for this group to change the religion. However, if the government intervene, what will happen is partially the government can show the stance that we have to say that the fundamental right is important. We think that through this process, what happened? The government saying that compared with your idea, this idea is more superior. In this case, what happened is partially certain people within that religion can believe that. Of course, it may take long time. However, through the 10 years or 20 years, we think it can be changed. Look at the case of Horan case. Of course, in the Horan, the gay people are accepted the priest. And the priests or certain churches. We think that after that happened, that more and more people are seeing that gay priests, and after that these people are affected, these people have also the ability that they can bury the religion. We think through this process, these kind of churches can actually change the idea and we believe it's completely better. Therefore, we say that can be changed. And moreover, okay, next week let's talk about the second aspect, that's about the society level. So this is here, the problem that starts though, that because the government are accepting that certain people have the wrong idea, we say we have to say that is a wrong idea, that gay people or women are disabled, right? Disabled, they are worse than the ordinary people. We believe that in this process what happened is simply government is actually accepting the idea because the government is not interfering that priests or these certain people who have this kind of idea. We think in this process what happened is that certain people is the believe that women is less superior to themselves. We believe that, however, under model what we can say is that government is actively interfering the can change the idea that they believe that the women is also available. Women is also capable. More we believe the government actively saying that the women is also have the right that they believe the certain religion. We believe through this process, not only the people within the religion, but also all whole entire society can understand how the women or these minorities is also capable. We believe through this process, there's a clear process that we think that the government can provide the coach, but with opportunity to provide. We think that that's why we have to propose this thing.
Right, thank the speaker for his speech, and now I invite the first speaker for closing opposition.
Mr. Speaker, before moving on to our substantial arguments and our extension that we brought out in this debate, I would like to clarify our stance while rebutting to some of the points that were brought up by side government. First of all, they said that the problem that they identified at the beginning was that, these minorities, the gender minorities, the sexual minorities are not recognized in our society. But we see that there's a problem because by not letting them naturally overcome and letting the religions to accept these minorities, and by forcing these minorities, it's going to cause further harm that will be further elaborated in my speeches. They gave an example of the opening half basically gave an example of companies, and that was their justification, saying that they work on ability-based competition. We say that in the context of religion, the ability-based competition in it is based on how these individuals the religious people get to fit into the context of the religion and the boundaries that the religion provides itself, and which means that it's basically based on the beliefs, no sir, and under their same logical matter. So we say that and also we say that the religion itself has a right, because they have the right to deny even the companies itself. They have the right to deny and judge their applicants based on the belief and the value that the company itself respects. And so we say that their justification also falls. We see a major problem in their stance. The government is trying to change the perception of these people through religion institutions, while not solving the core problem that lays in the society. Which means that their policy is only trying to solve and forcefully make these people believe that we have to accept these social minorities when the core issue or the core problem of not accepting within the whole society is not solved. So we say that their policy itself does not solve what their intent at the beginning. We also see a very major contradiction, no sir. We see a major contradiction coming out from inside government because they say that we have to respect the individual's rights, but at the same time they say that they're going to neglect the religious rights of these religious institutions where these individuals actually fit into. Under this context, we say that they're presenting a contradictory stance or dual stance, which should not be justified. Now, what has the closing half brought up to? They say that they say that there's a severe problem which also they do not intend to solve in the social matter, only in the religious matter. But they also say that the religion does not have the capacity to change, and that external forces, in this case the government, is what has to intervene in order to cause change. However, we say this is wrong because it's not a problem with religion, first of all, and how are you to decide or determine what capacity they have, and who are you to determine that they don't have capacity in the first place? And they didn't provide the exact reasons to why they have this advantage in determining whether or not they have this right, and they didn't clarify their justification in doing this, and so their whole case on this part also fails. No, sir, in a minute, sir. Also, the member also brought up a point about how it's going to create more equal opportunity, and how he gave an example of supporting gay priests. However, in this status quo, we clearly told you that even in the status quo, the religion itself, without the intervention of the government, is also already moving towards a more open religious environment, where they're learning to accept without the intervention of the government. The government also gave you an example of a new lesbian priest in the States. And we say that this only justifies our stance because even without the intervention, the religious institutions are not only fundamentalists and composed of radical beings, rather they're learning to be more accepted
intervention of these people. So before moving on to our substantial arguments, yes, sir.
Okay. Open competition admits that if there is a harm to fundamental human rights, like life, we can intervene in religious institutions. Why is self-actualization through fundamental identities like gender or sexuality not an important thing?
We're not denying the fact that these problems that lay in society are not important. What we're saying is that rather than only focusing on targeting the religious institutions, it's more important for the government to provide policy that will actually change the society itself, not only the religious institutions, which at the end of the day is not going to solve the problem that lays in the society. So we say that your case is false. So, Mr. Speaker, we told you that our status, we are very fine with the status quo without the intervention of the government because change is possible without forceful changes. The reason why liberal democracy that was defined by the Prime Minister himself separates the state and religion is because the state respects the very values and the rights that these religion needs and attains. So, by forcefully conducting, we're not only going to hinder the process of change that might happen even without the intervention of the government, we're actually retracting the movement toward mass open religious environment. So our extension is we're going to basically analyze whether or not the religious institutions really have to change in order to apply the social changes along with the harms presented. The unanswered question of opening half of this debate was there was no set limitations, which means that once the government intervenes in this case, there's not going to be a stop. Because we see that this is only becoming a stepping stone for the government to actually intervene in all the rights that they used to respect and guarantee. And we say that by conducting this, it's only going to be easier for the government to actually intervene in other forms of matters that they think is important for change. And until when do you actually say that that religious rights? When do you actually say that the government has a limit and restriction to how far they actually intervene? We never heard any clarification on their policy on how they're going to actually send out a message that this matter is so important enough that we have to attend religion first rather than other aspects of a society. We say that the social another harm that we would like to analyze what actually happens if we apply the exact social happenings in society. We say that by forcing it doesn't actually lead to the section of its members. Rather, it only leads to internal disputes even within that religious institution, meaning that they're going to split between those people who actually will accept the policy that the government prevents, and there are also going to be fundamentalists and radical beings who are going to actually work argue for their own rights, religious rights, and prove how that their Bible itself is not only just a book, it's their basic fundamental idea and the value of its religion itself. And we say that they have no justification whatsoever to forcefully change something that's already might be changed in the first place, even without their intervention. And most importantly, we say that this is going to basically distort the very religious identity by saying that you have to listen to the government because we don't trust you enough to actually accept what the social change is requiring in the first place. So for these very reasons, we are very proud of the proposal.
Right, thank you, Speaker, for her speech, and now we invite the final speaker on the bench, the EWHA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We never say religion is not important. However, we say if this division violates fundamental rights like gender, homosexuality, it shall be changed. In this case, we say this division itself is not so much important, and this kind of division has to be modified by intervention of the government. That's why we are very proud to propose. Firstly, I'd like to engage what the previous speaker mentioned about. The previous speaker has mainly talked about even after adoption, these kind of churches or leaders of the sect try to stick to the current situation, and they never try to change the gradually change even in the future level. Therefore, we say in the future level, we can actually guarantee fundamental rights of every single citizen in the different countries. That's why we have to propose this motion. Now, I'd like to other point where I like to summarize this debate with two questions. The first question is about principle level, whether government has the right to intervene religious sovereignty or not. And secondly, I'd like to talk about the practical level, how actually it's supposed to change social norms in society, and how actually we can protect citizens' rights and citizens' fundamental rights, or versus how it is harmful to society level, which contains from the opposite side. The first question, whether the government has the right to intervene or not. Our side clearly mentioned that if religion tries to violate fundamental rights like gender or sexuality, which cannot be changed. In such cases, government has to intervene because first place, as my great partner told you, government exists to protect people's fundamental rights. But this is kind of a social contract that to protect people's rights and people's safety rights, people agree some kind of idea and they try to establish the government. This clearly says that the government has certain obligation to protect citizens' rights. On that point, that's the opposition side, was saying that sovereignty of the region is sacred or so forth. However, the religion they try to protect it. They try to protect that the religion try to violate and discriminate the people who are gay, or simply the company who try to hire majority of the religious people or so forth. We never think that such kind of religion or company is not the important issue in this way. Rather, we have to intervene and we have to protect more people in society. That's why we say at the first level there is clear justification for it now. And also, like the father told you, in the current situation, if we continue this situation, we cannot change such kind of dangerous and irresponsible religion in the future level. Like the father told you, in the current situation, some religious leader going to make some brainwashing to these believers. For example, from the childhood, they try to educate these people to believe their religions. And because of that, these children are actually brainwashed, and even they become adults, they simply believe that this religion is completely valid and right. Therefore, we say, in the current situation, we cannot change, and that's the reason why we have to intervene and we have to change it. Therefore, we say there are clear justification here. Then, I'd like to move on to the next question about the practical level.
You really think that your policy can change that social stigmatization that our side has been arguing for?
That is what I want to say next Friday. Firstly, my grandfather told you that actually we can change this social norm by saying the two reasons. The first, we can send a message to the government, to the churches or leaders. Firstly, if they get such a message, firstly, these churches have to obey it. Because if they actively try to spread some dangerous ideas to their believers, of course they will be criticized, or in some cases they will be arrested. In such cases, at the first phase, they can actively educate their believers. Therefore, we said the people who now try to be some very dangerous religion will not be educated in the future level. Therefore, we say first we can change it, and also we say adoption these can leaders try to change their idea or ideology itself. This is because if they try to stick to the current current situation, the minority of the people who believe in minor religions or gay people are discriminated in social level. For example, some company might only hire the people who belong to the major religions. However, after production, what will change? Well, simply this company have to hire the people, not only majority of religions, but also varieties of people who hire in this company. We say this is very beneficial for the minor people. And also they also the opening operation talk about this kind of idea will spread to the some religions and it will like the religious law. However, we say this kind of situation may not happen, as we already defined clearly that this proposal only affects gender or sexuality, which cannot change by themselves. Therefore, we say such kind of dangerous situation may not happen, and for all reasons, we are very comfortable.
Right, I thank the speaker for his speech. The final speech of this pre-quarterfinals, and now invite the opposition to lead.
Mr. Speaker, the government side failed from the very beginning because they identified religious institutions as something equal to companies, Mr. Speaker. We do not believe that religious institution is somewhere we compete, Mr. Speaker. They talked about companies having rights to select people upon their abilities to compete within each other, Mr. Speaker. That's what exactly the Deputy Prime Minister said. We do not think that, when it actually comes to abilities, Mr. Speaker, we believe that religious institutions also have the right to examine the abilities of these individuals. When it comes to these religious institutions, the abilities would be how well these people actually fit into the criteria or the dogmas of these religious institutions, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, we believe that the government side fails from the very beginning. Now, we believe, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to such debates, or in our society, we very respect the religious rights and the rights of the government as well. We live in a government where we protect the secular government and the secular religious rights. This is not only to protect the rights of the government, but this is also to protect the independence of the religious institutions itself. We do not believe that the government side never thought on the perspective of the religious institution. Now, I have three different clashes to talk about in this debate today. The first clash would be, should religious institution forcibly changed in order to apply social changes? My second argument, second clash would be about what kind of messages does this send? My last clash would be about how do we actually better embrace such minorities within our society, Mr. Speaker. But before going on, let me briefly talk about what the closing basically said. So according to the closing government side, Mr. Speaker, religious idea itself should be denied because they simply think that religious is something that you're brainwashed, meaning that these individuals will never be able to decide rationally upon their choices because simply you're brainwashed about religious ideas. We